2 community houses. And on my first day of work, my coworker sat me down and said, "So you probably should know that one of the people we house is not here in Canada legally." When I first heard this, I was not sure what to say. In a way, I was frustrated. Why hadn't I been made aware of this in the interview process? Shouldn't I have known about this kind of gray area? I wasn't sure what I thought about it. It was quite a while before I met the man. We would schedule appointments, and he wouldn't come. He'd drop off his rent when I was not in the office. He was afraid to meet me. Not because of who I am, but because every new person who knew his story was one more person who could potentially turn him in. He worked for a concrete company as a day laborer. They would pay him cash. Some days they would pay him less than they should have. After all, who could he complain to? When you're afraid of the government and of the police, when you're worried that they might apprehend you at any moment, you don't have many places to turn. Eventually, we did get to know each other a little bit. And it was in spending time with this man that I began to realize how vulnerable a person could be. This was not ever my experience. How someone could have to live their whole life with looking over their shoulder. We're coming to the end of our series of Hope in Action, and today we're going to talk about human migration. And human migration is a hot topic these days. We can think of the news stories of ICE agents in the States being sent into cities like LA, Portland, Chicago, American citizens being deported to South America. And while less dramatic, there's plenty of news here in Canada. The Carney government's budget last week has set lower and lower immigration targets for the coming years. Quebec is now threatening to no longer provide social assistance to those who are awaiting asylum hearings. But whatever the details of these stories, it would seem that the West is hardening its heart towards migrants. And while there might be some good arguments to be had around this, I wonder how the church is called to be hopeful in the midst of this. What does it mean to be a community of hope in an age of migration? I've chosen the book of Ruth tonight to draw some parallels about this. And the book of Ruth is a bit of an outlier in the Old Testament. It's a narrative that's not concerned with the great people of history. There's no talk about the nation of Israel. Instead, it follows 2 women and their refugee experience. Our reading tonight was from the 2nd chapter, but the 1st chapter sets the scene. So let's summarize it, paying attention to the Hebrew names. I took 2 years of Hebrew, just enough to be dangerous, folks. Here we go. All right. To start, we're introduced to Elimelech, which means in Hebrew, which means God is king, and his wife, Naomi, my delight. They have 2 sons, Mahlon, which means sickly, and Chilion, which means frailty. If you think back to grade 7 English, this is an example of foreshadowing. A famine has come to their hometown of Bethlehem, and this is ironic because Beit means house, and Lechem means bread. Bethlehem, is the house of bread. So the family has run out of food in the house of bread, and we would have assumed it was more like the Olive Garden, unlimited breadsticks. But they leave the promised land God has just led them into, and they go to a rival nation, Moab. And not long after their arrival in the new land, Elimelech dies. Naomi is left with her 2 sons, so she allows the boys to marry some locals, Ruth and Orpah. And perhaps things were looking up. But it is at this point that the names of the sons come to fruition, and they die as well. So after being in Moab for at least 10 years, Naomi gives up. I'm going home, she says. Ruth and Orpah, stay here. Orpah goes to her family, but Ruth clings to Naomi. And in a favorite moment of mine, she tells her, where you will go, I will go, and where you will stay, I will stay. It's a beautiful sentiment. Ruth's name means companion. But there can be no denying the tragedy that Naomi has found. She is far from her homeland. Her husband and sons are dead. Naomi, my delight, changes her name to Mara, meaning bitterness. So if we zoom back to today, human migration is spurred by fundamentally 2 things. war, and economic realities. Climate change is a quickly growing third category. Naomi's migration is economic. There's no food available during a famine. And because she has traveled outside the borders of Israel, she'd be classified as a refugee. If she'd stayed within Israel, we might label her internally displaced. Today, the United Nations estimates that there are 122 million people who have been displaced. 79 million of these are internally displaced. They've left their homes, but they have not left their countries. Think of conflicts like the Ukraine or Gaza or Sudan. 43 million of these 122 are people who have left their home country. We would call them refugees. It's hard to know these numbers, right? They're so big. But Canada's population is 41 million. So there's now more refugees in our world than there are people in our country. If we imagined internally displaced and refugees together, they would be the 12th largest country in the world. But what's most shocking to me is that I took a course on this 10 years ago, and the numbers have doubled since then. So Naomi makes this choice to return to Israel, repatriating. And this is the preferred outcome for most migrants. Like you and I, most people's deepest desire is just to go home, to be with their kin in the landscape they know, in a culture that is familiar and a language that is their own. So Naomi is home in Bethlehem, and Ruth is a foreigner in a land that she does not know. Let's look at a few of the verses that we were reading from chapter 2 tonight. We'll start with verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, behind someone in whose sight I might find favor." Ruth's only means to provide food is to follow behind the hired workers, picking up the small amounts of grain that they've left behind. For many migrants today, finding legal work is very difficult due to their status. Even in our own country, there have been stories of employers who take advantage of those who are attempting to survive under the radar. So when Boaz hears that there is a foreigner taking grains from his fields, how might we expect him to react? After all, the land of Israel has recently been through a famine. Boaz probably has his own mouths to feed. Then Boaz says to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow them. I've ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." Boaz's response is one of kindness and protection. He has heard about Ruth's faithfulness to Naomi, but this response is also meant to draw our minds to the laws of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and I know you're excited about that. Deuteronomy 24 contains a section called miscellaneous laws. Here's one from verse 19. "When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be left for the alien, the orphan, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all your undertakings." Boaz's willingness to allow a stranger to take food from his fields is not simply charity. It is the embodiment of the law of Yahweh, a concrete expression that the God of Israel has compassion not just for the Israelites, but for the foreigners who live amongst them. Boaz could try and extract every last ounce of grain and value from the land that God has given him, but he recognizes that part of his role is to give back from the harvest God has provided, to be generous. Let's also not miss this little phrase in the middle of verse 9 that we just read. "I've ordered the young men not to bother you," says Boaz. Ruth is a vulnerable person in this new land. Her culture would have been different. Her appearance would have likely been different. She had no male relatives. She would have stuck out. Migrants today are often at the mercy of wherever they find themselves. Their states have failed and cannot protect them. Human trafficking, sexual violence, these are things of real danger. So Boaz speaks to the young men because their potential abuse of Ruth would likely have had very little repercussion. And again, this is not just the kindness of a good man. It is the law of God coming to life. Leviticus 19. "The alien who resides with you shall be to you as a citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself. For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." While the laws of Canada are charitable to people who come here for help, I'm not sure they invite us to love migrants as ourselves. Boaz ends the exchange with Ruth in verse 12. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward with the Lord. A full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Perhaps we might have expected Boaz to end their conversation like a mob boss. Don't worry, kid, you're under my protection now. See? It's pretty good, right? You owe me a favor, this sort of thing. But Boaz turns Ruth to God and uses a maternal image. God has spread her wings over Ruth. She has nothing to fear. She is warm and dry and safe under the wings of a loving God. Boaz knows his actions are in response to the law of God. But I also wonder if part of what drives Boaz's generous response is his mother's story. Her name was Rahab. We meet Rahab during Israel's battle at Jericho. Do you remember that story? Rahab harbors Israel's spies as they learn about the city. She is instructed to hang a red rope out of her window, and her house is spared when the walls of the city collapse. As a foreigner, she is brought into the nation of Israel, adopted as one of their own. And growing up the son of a foreigner must have shaped Boaz's experience. As he saw Ruth, a migrant in his field, trying to survive on the grace of others, perhaps he sees his own family. All of us in this room have ancestors who migrated. Maybe it was a parent or a grandparent or people before them. But part of our stories is likely shaped by these journeys. And one of the things that I love about Scripture is that while there are chapters that are strange, there are also chapters that remind us that our world is not so far from the experiences of these people. So much has changed in 3,000 years, but so much of the human experience is just the same. Ruth's world is a world of migration, and these stories of Rahab and Naomi, Ruth and Boaz, they remind us being the people of God is not an ethnic identity. God's circle is wider. In a world that was essentially tribal, where family and blood are the lines of allegiance, it ought to shock us a little that the laws of Israel are so charitable to the outsider. And for the world that we now inhabit, which seems to be becoming more tribal, only we call it nationalism, I don't believe that God's law has changed. We are still called, as the people of God, to be good to the migrant. In 2017, Vancouver hosted the TED Talks. You know these. Some brilliant person stands up and gives their best 15 minutes on some subject or another. And on this occasion, there was a surprise speaker scheduled, Pope Francis. Perhaps you remember in the years leading up to this, a lot of news about migrants trying to make it to Europe, often Syrians fleeing a devastating war. And perhaps Pope Francis could have talked about some major new initiative, or he could have shared about some wonderful news that the Catholic Church was doing, but he chooses to start somewhere else. He suggests that we need a revolution of tenderness. A revolution of tenderness. Here's a little of what he had to say. And what is tenderness? It is the love that comes close and becomes real. It is a movement that starts with our heart and reaches our eyes, the ears, the hands. Tenderness means to use our eyes to see the other, our ears to hear the other, to listen to the children, the poor, those who are afraid of the future. To listen also to the silent cry of our common home, of our sick and polluted earth. Tenderness means to use our hands and our heart to comfort the other, to take care of those in need. Francis has some pretty powerful people in that room, and he wants to talk about tenderness. A love that comes close, that starts in the heart, reaches the eyes, the ears, the hands. And so for a few moments tonight, let's reflect on this tenderness of heart, of eyes and ears and hands, and our relationship to the migrant. A few thoughts which you can take with a grain of salt. In a number of places, Scripture describes hearts of stone, a heart that is tough, walled off from the world, walled off from the pain of others. Perhaps a challenge of our connected world is that we are aware of all the suffering across the globe, and yet we are so removed from it. These images of war and disaster and famine are so normalized for us. Our hearts are no longer moved to compassion by them. In a strange way, perhaps part of softening our heart might be being more diligent about the media that we allow into our life. People talk about compassion fatigue. What would it look like to admit to ourselves that we can't fix all the problems of the world? Is there some wisdom in choosing where we will invest our compassion, invest our tenderness, even if that means being a little bit less informed? Perhaps hardness of heart, for some of us, is a defense mechanism. We've been hurt by a situation or someone, and the way that we protect ourselves is by not allowing anything in now. We stop others at the gate of our heart before they get too close. Perhaps this is still an important defense for you or for me, but maybe we are ready to open up a little bit, to be a bit more vulnerable. So how could we practice letting others in? Perhaps the next time we witness something that breaks our heart, instead of trying to shut it out, it might be good to give ourselves permission to have a good cry, to allow the pain of the other to affect us. Tenderness, Francis tells us, means to allow our eyes to see the other, our ears to hear the other. Perhaps part of growing a tender heart is by intentionally making this space and this time to take in others with our senses. A small place to start, maybe by being less willing to pull out our phone in line at the grocery store. Perhaps these moments are an opportunity to see and hear those around us, to see people who are helping us as more fully human, to recognize that they are a gift to us, and offer them the warmth of eye contact, a smile, a cheerful thank you, an interaction that is maybe a bit less transactional and a bit more human. Lastly, tenderness has a movement to it, from the heart to the eyes and ears to the hands. A tender heart is a heart moved to action. And maybe this doesn't have to be super complicated. A sign of action for some of us might just be not getting frustrated when someone's English is not very good. Taking a breath, believing they're doing their best, being patient and walking through it with them. Maybe tenderness for you tonight means jumping into some of Winnipeg's amazing, wonderful nonprofits, places like the Welcome Place. Adrian and I were blessed to share a conversation with one of James's classmates' parents. They're both researchers in human migration, it turns out. And so to sit with them, they were glowing about some of the work that happens in Winnipeg. It was really cool. There's good things that happen here. Let's wrap this up. If you've been to the store lately, you know, as Mary Lynn has mentioned, that Christmas has been released upon us. The Gospel of Matthew's Christmas story begins with a list of Joseph's ancestors. And not only does this list include Rahab, Boaz, Ruth, but many other migrants, some who traveled because of famine or political violence. But the family at the end of the list were also refugees. While Jesus was still young, a king would launch a campaign to try and kill all the children in his hometown. Mary and Joseph would flee with their child to Egypt, where they would spend years waiting for an opportunity to return home, possibly surviving by the generosity of their Egyptian hosts. We worship a refugee, and it's no wonder that the law of God has a soft spot for migrants. Communities of hope in an age of migration have a tenderness to them, and I pray that we could grow in that tenderness. Amen.